close their eyes, turn on the lights, and wait till everything stopped moving.
Now, you said races for cockroaches. My mind went immediately to like, what were we talking about? Like Asian cockroaches versus Mexican cockroaches versus.
I was thinking the same thing.
I was like, what?
There's a runway. You guys sleep over there. Unless if the weather's nice, they'll go golfing. You know.
Hey.
And they'll only fly if it's beautiful blue skies.
Some of the best golf courses, you know.
Oh, absolutely. That's what they built first.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Anytime.
Podcast. No, I'm kidding. Well, Frank.
Yes.
Mark.
Yep.
Still half asleep, so it's a very early recording, so I'm also terrible with names. But Frank, you were Navy. You were a P3
P3 pilot. Yeah.
pilot in the Navy, reserve and active duty.
Correct.
Mark, you were Air Force, and you did what we would now call combat correspondence, essentially, or what they would change that to.
Air reconnaissance photography, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now it's all video, so.
Obviously. Well, go ahead and introduce you guys yourself a little bit more and tell me about yourselves. Figure out what how you want to do that. Go first.
Sure. I went through the ROTC program in the Navy at Marquette. Got commissioned in 79. And I stayed on active duty for till 85. I was based in Jacksonville, Florida, and Corpus Christi as an instructor. I got out of the active duty in 85 and went up to Glenview, which is Chicago.
Yeah.
And they closed the base in 94. They had a big RIF, reduction in force, in the mid 90s. And I was able to get a retirement out of that with 15 years to the day. So
actually, right on the money.
Within a day, yes, I got lucky. But and then I flew in the airlines. I had 6 different airline jobs. It was a bad time when I was going through. So I kept on moving around and up.
Okay. So you said you were on the airlines
from 85 to I just retired 2 years ago.
Oh, wow. Congrats. Late congratulations on retirements for a second time. So that means you were doing pilot stuff
since
right around
21.
9/11 too, right?
9/11, yep.
That must have been a drastic change in policies and procedures.
That changed my whole life. Yeah. It wiped out the airline industry. After that, I had been with US Air for almost 15 years. They said the cuts weren't going to go that deep, but they did go that deep. So during my prime time, I got laid off and flew for some smaller airlines, and I got on with JetBlue about 3 years later and retired with JetBlue. But it changed everything. Obviously, procedures as well.
Yeah.
Not good.
Well, that was definitely a dark time. I remember where I was. We won't go into all that. That's not what today is about. But I had to ask you about that one because I know people that were started flying after that, and we're all used to the current rules and regulations and FFA requirements for flying post 9/11. But very rarely do I get to ask somebody what it's like to go from one to the other.
Yeah, before, I mean, we could have guys in the flight deck, you know, and it's no big deal. The kids came up, the door was open, and they have a jump seat that's used for examinations too for the FAA, but they can use it, sit down and have people look out, and it was nice. But
that's like the stories of the kids that got to go up in the cockpit and get the little captain wings kind of things. That they used to do.
Some of the kids, they travel a lot, and they had their little flight books. So, you sign.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's one of those things I wish we would be able to bring back, but people just have to ruin things.
Yeah. It's tough now.
We'll delve a little bit more deep into that here in a little bit. Gotta let Mark, who's sitting here with a cooked grin on his face, waiting for his turn to talk over here.
Okay. Well, my military career basically started out early. I was actually in junior ROTC in high school. First 3 years was normal. Worked my way up to be a captain, and then the senior year they select one person to be the cadet commander. I was the cadet commander. So going in the military was kind of like a given. But my sister was older than I was, and she was going to school at the time, and my parents really couldn't afford two kids going to college.
Right.
So I figured go in the military, get your education, do that.
Okay.
Went in. One thing I recommend for everybody, get a guaranteed job going in. Because I went and took my ASVABs and they said, "Oh, you want to be a judge or mechanic?" I said, "No, I don't want to be a judge or mechanic." So I chose photography, and my school was going to be in Denver, Colorado, which I thought was pretty good. Went in 19...
Good weather, at least.
Yep. Graduated in May of 74 and went in July 74. And went to basic training in Lackland Air Force Base. Then went up to Denver and learned how to snow ski when I was up there the first time. That was kind of cool. I was up there for 18 weeks for training. First of all, it was a pretty long school. First duty station was off at Air Force Base, Nebraska. Worked in the building that actually built the Enola Gay.
Oh, wow.
Called Building D. And all the wood floors at the top, wooden bricks that were heavily varnished. And the reason they were that was because so they wouldn't have static electricity throughout the entire place.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's where I first got my first clearance. I had same as our current DNI, top secret SCI with alphabet soup after it. Of course.
Yeah, the whole pole scope polybubble. Yeah.
But that was where I was there. I was there for a couple of years. Left that, went over to Hawaii after 2.5 years of being stationed in Offutt. So that was kind of a nice change from freezing cold in the wintertime to nice warm beaches.
Yeah. Well, they sent you from Denver, where it was nice and warm, up to a freezing cold place, and then we got to defrost them again, send them down to Hawaii.
Yeah.
Airport.
So I spent 2.5 years in Hawaii. Left there, went to Vandenberg Air Force Base where they shoot missiles. And I was fortunate to be there for the second dual launch ever.
Oh, wow.
So if you see any movie that has some missiles being launched simultaneously, if they're together, that was done in 1969. If you see one ahead of another one, that was done when I was there in 1980.
Okay.
So we did a lot of film after that. I mean, a lot of film. And so I'm basically doing the same thing. We were doing photo processing, doing motion picture at that point. Okay. Less than a year there, had orders going back to Hawaii. Everybody goes like, "How'd you do that?" And I said, "Well, I just made the rank. I had especially AFSC of being in reconnaissance. I had, 1 day's travel time from California to Hawaii. So I was basically went back and like everybody I had known when I was there, they're meeting me at the airport, and like, "Hey, how you doing?" Like a long TDY. Yeah. So then I decided to try and spend as much time as I could there. So I spent another 6 years there. And while I was there, I went TDY a couple times to Okinawa, Korea, a couple places I can't tell you about. And it was nice that it was a great place to live and just be part of it, but it was very expensive.
Oh, man.
So
Hawaii is expensive.
So of course, after being in Hawaii for that long time, they sent me back to Omaha, Nebraska. So I arrived in January, tan, everybody's like, "Where'd you come from?" I said, "Hawaii." Oh my God. So in the middle of January, especially, it's so cold. I mean, it's really bad. And I spent another 6.5 years there. Got an assignment going to Panama. And I'm like, "Panama?" He said, "Yeah." What we did was we were the 130 group, the air intelligence down there, that did the FLIR operations for drug interdictions down country.
Oh, okay.
So we would have a 130 with a FLIR unit in the back. Our guys would go down to a country, say Peru, pick up a intelligence officer from the Peruvian military, and he would fly on the plane. And if you remember, the Peruvian Air Force shot at one of ours one time, it's because the cartels paid off the fighter pilots to do that. And even with the Peruvian officer on board. And we had a couple of guys that were actually injured and got, Purple Hearts and commendations for being in there because they got the plane back and safely landed, which is good. I got there a month and a half after that happened. Cool. So and also being the ranking person, I was made first sergeant of the entire squadron. I'm like, "What do you mean first sergeant?" Well, you're the ranking guy, so you're first sergeant. They weren't big enough to have a first sergeant of their own, so the senior enlisted person automatically became that. So that was an interesting experience for a year and a half. And then, of course, our unit was the first unit to close down. We were giving Howard Air Force Base back to the Panamanians because the Air Force was leaving. Marines had already left on their one of their bases and gone. And the Navy was slowly bringing down their stuff as well. Left there and went to headquarters MAC in St. Louis, and was there for a year and a half. And that's where I spent a lot of time doing combat camera guys. Okay. This was between Gulf War I and Gulf War II. And, Saddam Hussein would make a saber rattling type thing. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Well, we'd start gearing up and we'd send people over. Well, our job at headquarters was to schedule our photographers to go out and take pictures of them loading tanks on planes, loading tanks on ships, loading supplies, and also sending guys over to show them unloading in Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or wherever it happened to be.
It's all the intelligence on the actual trafficking.
Correct. Gotcha. So that was one of the things. Of course, being in headquarters, being the junior guy there, I had the 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift. So I had to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and by 2 o'clock, and 7 o'clock briefing for the general in the morning, if not earlier. Usually it was 7 o'clock. And so we had to have all the pictures ready for the lieutenant when he did his briefing, what was being done overseas.
Right.
And I actually retired out of there in July of 98. And I came to Pittsburgh area and started working in an unrelated career field. I was into computers when I was in the military a little bit, back when a 10 megabyte hard drive was a big thing. And so I felt that was to be a better career when I got out than going to photo, because I saw photo going digital and going down. It wasn't a very good idea. So I spent 20 years being a business analyst, running reports out of data from computer systems that were already in somebody's way. And that's where I've been for the last 27 years. Retired officially last year.
Congratulations on your retirement, too. So it sounds like you went from your career and then jumped into the civilian career. You realized with that understanding of reconnaissance and the tracking of patterns that you got trained to do there, you realized that your career field in the Air Force probably wasn't going to translate perfectly in civilian, so you kind of took a spin step and adjusted quickly.
Correct.
Something a lot of these guys now, and even some of y'all's generation, had an issue with was adjustment back into civilian side. They didn't know how to use what they learned in civilian side. I know I personally have had issues with that myself and overcame them, thankfully. But excuse me, there are other guys that still struggle with that. Right?
Yep.
Trying to find that footing when they get back, and that's how a lot of them end up falling into the wrong things.
Especially if they've been in for 6, 8, 10 years, and they've got a way of life of doing something.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's a total change. You don't have to be that place. You don't have to go somewhere. You could, do whatever you want. That adjustment for a lot of guys is sometimes frightening. Really is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, how did you guys handle? We know how you handled your transition, but how was the actual thought process behind it? Was it hard for you? Did you adjust quickly? Did you kind of have to think on it? Did you take some months off and decide what you were doing?
Well, when I was in Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, I saw what was coming as far as the photo goes, because at that time we had combined career fields in the Air Force from when reconnaissance photography was different than still photography, and like going to a lab and getting your portrait taken or something like that, or an honoring ceremony of somebody getting promoted.
Right.
Was combined. I'm like, why are you combining? Because there was so many people being shrunk that they didn't need reconnaissance that much anymore. The SR-71 was being mothballed. The U-2 was being scaled down. The F-4s, R-4 reconnaissance aircraft, they were gone, basically. So all of that basic knowledge that I had been taught all those years was being phased out. So I realized at that point, what do I have to do some of the time? So while I was at Scott and working in combat camera, one of the things they wanted to do with the combat camera guys was to get imagery back to the headquarters as soon as possible. Well, that's when digital cameras first started being involved. Okay. And that's when Kodak had a digital camera that weighed 8 pounds.
Jeez.
6.5 pounds of that was battery.
That doesn't surprise me.
So just the technology of trying to get a landline and a modem at a bit rate of like 9.6 or 14.4 and transmit it back overnight so that the general could see the next morning what their guys were actually doing was a total different concept. And I said, well, this is probably going towards the future. So at that point, I realized there's nothing for me in photo. I should try and definitely go something else.
So you saw the writing on the wall, and
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
that's smart.
I
And
was
we know
at
you kind of just transitioned right into flying still, but
kind of when I left in '85, moved back to Wisconsin, where I was from, Milwaukee area, and
land of the cheese.
I'm a cheesehead and Packer fan, but we won't go there. But I was trying to actually get into a different field. I had applied with Quad Graphics, trying to get in a training program to have a job where I could be home all the time, and I could stay in Milwaukee and be with my family and extended family, and it just didn't work. So I kind of gave up and said, "Well, I'm a pilot. I might as well try and keep on doing that." I didn't have as many hours as I found out that the airlines needed at the time.
Okay.
And I was a white male, so that didn't help any. There was a lot of in the mid '80s. They were hiring a lot of minorities, and people with far fewer qualifications got in ahead of me. But that's why.
Almost like DEI started back then.
Yes, yeah,
I
definitely.
did.
So I just had to work my way up through the different airlines to get more flight hours, and that's also why I went into the reserves in '85. And that kept me flying the planes there, and thankfully, one of the guys on my crew said you need to stick this out because the benefits when you do retire are huge. Just even TRICARE.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I got TRICARE when I was 60, and that makes a big difference. So,
Break, stand by to receive. This segment is brought to you by American Legion Post 548. Legion is out there busting their chops on Capitol Hill and in your community, battling like champs for veterans benefits and a VA that doesn't make you want to kickstart a landmine. They're like over-caffeinated E4s who actually get stuff done. We're veterans fighting to make sure America has our backs, one hard-won perk at a time. Swing by our website or your local post for the full rundown. That's legion.org. Send it. No, I know the health benefits and that from the military retirements, the huge.
I don't know how long it's going to last, though. It's very, very expensive.
It is. But I think that, I mean, we're not getting too much into political side of what could possibly and not possibly happen.
Right.
There are things that are justified for spending money on, and there's things that aren't.
Oh, absolutely.
So things that are a complete and utter waste of money that don't benefit the people who pay the money and taxes and stuff, that's the stuff we should be looking at cutting. The stuff that we should be looking at keeping, even if it is a little pricey, is the stuff that helps people who pay the taxes and who also are like us, who went and did our jobs and came back, and now we got things that are wrong with us, and we need to be taken care of for those situations. The best way I can phrase it is the same way I phrase it every time somebody asks me about it. When you were in the military and you were issued a piece of equipment, you signed for that equipment. Something happened to it. You were responsible for it, right? You had to pay for the damages if anything happened to it.
Absolutely.
When you go into the military, they tell you your ass belongs to the U.S. government. They signed for us. Why don't they have to be responsible the same way we did for the equipment they signed for?
That's true.
Mental, physical, or otherwise. There was damage done to us. They're responsible for paying for that damage until it's either fixed and repaired or compensated until it's not an issue anymore.
That's a good point.
That's the way I explain it. Because There's too many guys that are coming back now, and even some from previous generations, either just wanted to wash their hands completely of the entire service. They literally shove it in the back corner like it never happened. Or the ones that, well, I didn't do the same thing as the other guys. I'm not missing an arm. I'm not missing a leg. I didn't deploy. I didn't see combat when I deployed. So I don't deserve the same thing that they do. Did you sign the paper? Did you take the oath? Did you go to training? Okay. Guess what? At the bare minimum, you're a vet. At the other side, you're retired. If you stayed the whole time, you still got injured when you were on their watch, whether it be mental or physical or otherwise.
Right.
They're required to take care of you now. They don't quit letting the government get off with not helping you when they're taking your money in taxes anyway.
That's an age-old problem, though.
Yeah.
I remember that's what with the creation of the VA
Mhm.
in 1919. That was the Legion stuff, but they weren't going to do it of their own volition.
No,
You had to stick up for yourselves.
exactly. And if you don't stick up for yourself, don't expect other people to stick up for you.
Right.
Like, we're not going to force people into making the decision to go to the VA. You have people in your corner if you decide to do so, whether it be the Legion or whether it be just your what we now call battle buddies or fellow soldiers.
Yep.
Sailors, airmen, or Marines. They're all there to back you, just like they were whenever you were in. You just got to make the decision. That's what you want.
See, even that today, there's a bump in the road when you turn 65 and go on Medicare or Medicaid. Yeah, Medicare.
Okay.
Medicare will not pay money to VA, so you cannot go as a retired person. We can't go to the VA without them charging us the full price of what they would normally charge to uh, Medicare.
Oh, okay.
So I'm like,
So it's still not covered if you have a service connection?
No. Well, if you have a service connection, yes.
Okay.
But see, even if you don't have a service connection, if you're a veteran, the VA will see you as old as you are.
Okay.
As they saw my dad. My dad was only in during Korea. But when I started going to the VA, they would cover everything for him. He was 90 years old when he passed away, but he was still going to the VA for that. Just basic, yearly physicals,
Right.
sprain this, whatever it was. They would take care of him.
Okay.
I can't have that service.
Hmm.
So I have to have a civilian portion that's covering what Medicare doesn't carry. And I have to go to a hospital that Medicare will pay, like UPMC or Allegheny Health Network.
So that's definitely something they should be looking into and they should be fixing. I mean, you shouldn't have to have your private healthcare insurance to go to a civilian doctor for
Right.
you to. You could just completely nix Medicare at that point and just stick with VA. But
Especially when 20 years I went to the VA while I was out and still under 65.
Mhm.
I had two doctors. One for a lot of years, but they all knew all my history, every operation I had, every, exam I had. They knew everything about me. Well, now I go to a new doctor and it's like, okay, start from scratch one. Okay, well, give me a copy of your history. Because even the VA will not give them a full version of what happened when I was in the VA to a civilian doctor. So just another little wrinkle.
Yeah, that's something I need to look into because that's ridiculous. Like, this is coming from my perspective, with the people not wanting to sign up and not wanting to get the service connected issues and file for disability benefits and stuff like that because they don't feel like they deserve it. But going and seeing the doc regular without having that, one, I didn't know 100% that you could just walk in without a service connection. That's another thing that's an issue, I think, with the communication on the VA with the younger guys, that you can't go to the VA if you don't have a service connection. So that might be a good bit of information for the ones that don't know that. If you're a vet, go into the VA if you need a doctor.
Yeah.
And it's a lot better than it was even 10 years ago with getting an appointment. Especially with the ones around here, there's clinic hours. For the one in Pittsburgh, you can walk right in. And the one up in Butler there's a, I won't say ER because it's not an ER, it's like an urgent care type stuff that built up there now. So I didn't know about the over 65 thing. The Medicare. That's
Well, we all learn when we get there.
that's
So
fair.
I'm sure you wouldn't have learned.
Oh, I'm sure I would have found out. So thanks for the heads up.
Yeah.
That would have been a very shitty thing to run into randomly again.
So I didn't have any service-related injuries, and I never used the VA. And part of it is the last section, I think, is that there's an income limit, which is pretty low uh, to allow you to use their facilities. So I'm not quite sure how much, but it's not that much.
Yeah, my dad had to submit a form every 2 years to the VA of what his actual income was.
Mm.
So yeah, that was one thing I had to help him with every couple of years was to fill out that form and get it back to the VA. As long as he was X amount over the poverty level or whatever was the threshold, they were going to see him. But they were,
Okay.
But I do think the VA should concentrate on the vets that do have issues.
Oh, yeah.
I've been fortunate. I haven't had any issues, unless you ask my wife. But,
well, I mean, we won't get into that one.
Yeah.
The new expression is you're not really a veteran until you got at least one divorce under your belt. So check that box. But no, yeah. I don't know. The VA process is definitely one of those ones that there's so many nuances to it, and that they're not clearly spelled out for people.
Right. You think it should be streamlined. There's plenty of vets that have issues, and they don't know where to go.
Yeah.
And they're afraid to ask. So those are the people we truly need to help.
Yeah. Honestly, I think a great way to handle this, and this is just my own personal opinion, you guys tell me what you think. When you go into the military, you're required to undergo a physical evaluation, fit for duty evaluation.
Right.
You go undergo a little bit of an evaluation when you leave, depending on why you're leaving. I think that you should have to go full physical evaluation when you get out of the military, whether it be one tour or a career, it doesn't matter. And it should be done by the VA. There should be a VA representative on every military installation in the continental U.S., and those should be the only bases you're allowed to operate from. It's not that way already.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't deploy, so I don't know. I'm stateside. But you should have to go through that representative, that doctor from the VA, doing an out-processing medical evaluation. And after that out-processing evaluation, they start a medical file for you at the VA automatically, where they already take a look at anything that you may or may not have, set you up to be able to file a claim for those things if you have the reasonable cause to do so, and get the ball rolling for you. It's not that hard.
To provide continuity.
Exactly.
And actually it would simplify things.
Simplify a lot of things.
Yeah.
The application process would be almost non-existent. You'd have that at the end of it'd be part of the out processing paperwork.
Right.
You go down one afternoon during your out processing, whether it be 1 week or 6 weeks, depending on when you start the process. Go down during that process, see the doc. Doc files the paperwork. The VA has another rep there, or even a VSO, like the Legion or something, has somebody there, and they're like, okay, so this is what they came back with. This is the paperwork that we're gonna go ahead and submit as your doc file for the VA from your military service. These are the things you will qualify for service connection. Here's the things that you don't. And then there's no battling down the road for, oh, well, I think back in 49, I rotated my rotator cuff a little too much and I can't move my right arm, which is causing my face to droop. You don't have to worry about all that because you were evaluated, and based off of your military medical records, which they would then have access to because they're on base, which everybody needs to get better at going to see the doc while they're in the military and getting that nexus established. That's a big thing. We're not going to go into that. We're not going to go into that.
That probably would be. I know in my out processing when I retired, one of the things they stressed several times during my out processing was We're going to give you a copy of your medical records, which was basically your last medical records that they had, and take that with you. And they encourage you to go to the VA first thing and do that. Now, my brother was in the military. He was in the Navy for 22 years, got medically retired, and they told him to go to the VA. He can go to the VA for 4 years. Why? Well, I was kind of busy. Why? You know?
And also, though, you transition to civilian life, and back in the day, the benefits used to be good for most of the jobs. So, and the VA didn't have a very good reputation. It's like in the Navy, the hospitals on base, you knew you weren't going to be seen for 7-8 hours if you broke a leg.
Jeez.
Because they didn't have enough people on staff.
Yeah.
And the doctors there were practicing medicine because they didn't know what it was in the first place. At times. I mean, there were bad doctors everywhere, but you get to practice on the patients.
Literally practicing medicine.
Yes.
Jeez. That's horrendous. That's about as bad as the stories I heard before I actually went in about what the VA was like too. They were telling me about family members and that had served. They were telling me like, I don't know why you actually want to go in. If I'd have known better, I would have avoided it. And don't bother with the VA when you get out unless you want to take 6 months to go get seen when you have a life-threatening condition that will end you in a week. I'm like, okay, so don't count on the health benefits. Got it.
Things have gotten a lot better.
And
I don't think people remember what it used to be like, and maybe that was the bad thought process why they didn't go in the first place. But I think, like you said, if you had that continuity,
yeah,
it would be more would work a lot better and have a better aura.
Yeah, we probably would.
So
again, I don't think they have all the answers. It's just like one of those things that you sitting on the toilet at 2 a.m. thinking about. You know what I mean? Call them toilet thoughts. I didn't bring my little toilet thought journal with me today, though. You should see that thing. It's like this thick, and I saw world hunger, just stuff like that. Literally, like the Grinch scene. Saw world hunger. Tell no one.
yeah.
But yeah, no, it's just I know half the stuff in that book would never work, but when things like this pop up and I think through them a little bit extra and they weigh on my mind, I'm like, oh, well, would this actually work? And then run it by other guys or people that would have an input or a viewpoint into it.
Yeah.
And see if they would work. And again, do I think that anybody's ever going to do anything with that? No. No, I don't. You want to see something get screwed up, hand it to the government. You guys were both in roughly the same era. End of Vietnam, Cold War type era. You said you were reserves and active duty out of Jacksonville,
Florida.
And then
I went through when I was going through flight training in November of 79 is when the Shah got overthrown and they had a hostage crisis.
yeah.
And going through flight training there. And actually, at the time, in Pensacola, they had their Iranian students learning how to fly the jets. So, needless to say, they left pretty quickly. But I think that's what helped Reagan get elected, obviously. And I was in during the good years, in my mind, as far as the Reagan military buildup.
Okay.
Trust but verify, peace through strength. So that was a very good time.
What did you guys think about that era of the Reagan administration and the Cold War? Like how we were handling things? Should we have been involved with things? Not necessarily Reagan itself, but like the whole administration and the way we handled things.
Well, against the Soviet Union, I think we handled it correct. Obviously, it was a lot simpler back then. It was basically good versus evil.
Right.
You knew who your enemy was, and now you really don't.
unfortunately.
So it's more black and white.
Yeah, it was. And that was the thing about it, was the fact that during that era, everything was one side or the other, and you knew exactly who stood on where. In Vietnam, you knew that at first the Russians and then the Chinese were supporting North Vietnam, while we were in South Vietnam. And it was, again, freedom versus that's turned 180 degrees since the war ended. I mean, a lot of stuff comes from Vietnam now that we buy here in America. We don't even realize.
Yeah.
Shirts, hats, all kinds of stuff. But
Yeah.
back then, like I say, it was like Frank said, it was so black and white. You knew who your enemy was. You knew who to keep tabs of, and so it was a lot simpler. And when things started to get more complicated, that's when things started to evolve in the military as well.
Right.
And it was right after that era, right after Reagan got out. In fact, Reagan was the first president that acknowledged our job in the intel community as being one of the unknown sacrifices that you make, because every time something happened in the world, we had to be going and knowing what's going on. And we had to have the intel ahead of time. We had to let him inform, his staff informed of what was going on. As I told Frank the other day, there was a ship called the Mayaguez that was captured right after Vietnam ended. And it was this U.S. ship that was being held in hostage. Well, they were actually a 4 or 5 day event before they actually went back and took it back over. But nobody knew about it until it was all over. Whereas in the intel community, we had to have like 10, 12 hours, which for back in the 80s, it was a time crunch. It really was.
Yeah,
You got
that's a quick turnaround.
Something less than 12 hours old, that's fresh intel. Today, if it's more than 2 hours old, it's not newsworthy at all.
Yeah, if it's 2 hours old, the news outlets have already put it out to the people. Intel community now, I've talked to a few people, and that's actually the route I was supposed to be going down in the military too. If it's not instantaneous feedback, it's useless. If you don't know, if you can't see through the eyes of the soldier on the ground and halfway around the world, or at the time he's seeing it with maybe a couple milliseconds ping, the intel is useless.
There's an old movie called Spies Like Us with Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it's Bill Murray.
I think so.
But in that opening sequence they show the old Russian SA-22s mobiles going through fields and through the forest, in the snow and everything else, starting to set up a launcher and everything else. Then it goes up to a satellite, and a satellite, like the beep, beep, beep sounding going on, looks down. All of a sudden, a guy in Washington, and a picture's coming off of like a fax machine,
Yeah.
And all of us guys are sitting there, and we look at each other like this. And later, of course, we're talking in the skiff area. We're like, we want one of those machines. Where can we get them? I mean, of course, it was totally plausible,
Yeah.
But it's like this was the '80s. Can't have something like that.
Yeah, that's something one of the 3-letter agencies probably established, not y'all. I mean, my uncle. Sorry, backtrack this for a second. My uncle was in the Air Force and during Vietnam, in the intel field. He didn't tell me what he did outside of that, but he said he worked intelligence in the Air Force. He said there was things that he could talk about seeing from his time out in New Mexico and Arizona and the bases out there, that basically if we think something is not existent and it's only 10 years into the future possible technology, the military's had it for 20 years.
Yep.
And that was back in 2000 when he told me that. So I can only imagine what we have now. But I know you can't talk too much about some of the stuff, but basically the same gist is what you're saying.
Yeah, there was what it was taken over, and the reason that they were phasing out the SR-71 program and cutting back onto U2 and got rid of the RF-4s because they were doing more satellite.
Okay.
And declassified program called Hexagon, or KH-9, if you want to Google it. It's on NASA's website and everybody else's now.
I think it's on Wikipedia too.
It is. In fact, there's a non-launched version of that satellite in the Air Force Museum in Wright-Patterson.
Oh, okay.
And so that's kind of thing. It's kind of nice. But the original one started back in the early 60s, and it can only keep in orbit for a couple of days, doing the film. But the last version of it, the KH-9, it carried over 200 miles of film.
Jeez.
And if you think of the fact of how much film that is, but if you think about what a normal type of film from like 35 millimeter, how thick it is, the film on that satellite was as thick as saran wrap.
It's not very thick.
Correct.
I had to think for a second.
And when you handle that, and it has to be processed and developed into an imagery, you can't afford mistakes. And working in Omaha, that was one of the few places that we had actually processed that film at one time. We were a backup for doing the paint processing.
Okay.
So we knew how to do it because we had to practice it, and of course it's in total darkness. But going through that saran wrap and having to make cuts and splices on it, it was an experience. It really was.
Yeah.
But knowing that those satellites were taking over at that point, that's another reason that I decided, I need to get out of this career field and get into something else. But yeah, it was an interesting time. Like I say, carried 200 miles of film, and they had what they called buckets. And what it was there were 4 reels, actually 2 each, so that'd be 8 reels total. And they'd do what they call the oblique angle. So one camera would be on one side here, one camera would be on one side here. So when they look at something, it was actually a stereoscopic view.
Oh, okay.
So they could actually tell height, width, everything else by the angles between the two.
Kind of crude 3D rendering, basically.
And what would happen was the film would be run from the back of the satellite to the front into a bucket. And when bucket got full, it would automatically cut the film and eject the bucket. There was an entire squadron in Hawaii called the 6947th Test Group.
Okay.
When I was there, they flew 130s and HH-53 helicopters. Their job was to catch the bucket when it came down.
So you're catching a bucket dropped from a satellite in a helicopter.
Well, you had 3 C-130s at higher altitudes. When it came through the blackout portion, okay, and there was actually a transmitter on it, they were trying to zero in on where that was. They had big hooks out the back of the plane to actually capture the actual parachute as it came down. So that's why they had 3 of them. They were staggered at different altitudes, each one trying to catch the satellite. Then they had 3 helicopters at lower levels trying to do the same thing.
In case the 3 planes missed. Jeez.
Correct. And they had the last guy had PJs, basically Navy SEALs for the Air Force, that would actually go into the water and try and get it if it splashed. From 1961 to 1991, when the program actually ended, they lost 1 that entire time.
Watch, that was the one that had the important intel on it.
Well, they did eventually find out at the bottom of the ocean, and so far down, no one would ever be able to. And of course, the film's all ruined by now anyway. But
it was probably ruined as soon as it got more than 10.
But that's the way the process would be. And so if you had intel, because they figured that had to come down, they had to take that film, that had to be processed. And once it was processed, then you had to make duplications of that film. That had to be processed, sent out to the various intel agencies. So it was quite a long process. So if you had something that was 6 weeks old, that was the freshest stuff you can have. So like I say, when that movie came out, we saw that, and instantly we said, yeah, we want one of those.
Yeah. And now you're talking about digital everything, live feeds from satellites.
Oh, yeah. Instantaneous.
And, I mean, that's not even something we got to be quiet about or anything like that, because Google Maps used to do that, was it 2000, up to 2003? Ironically enough, that they should have stopped in 2001 with that as well. But the Google Earth, you could literally zoom in live feed on somebody's house and watch them.
Yeah.
And that was a Google satellite. That's a private entity satellite. Darn well the military's got something better than that.
It's just the evolution of how things go, and you just gotta roll the punches,
Mm-hmm. That's crazy. I mean, you got your planes were taking pictures and stuff too, right?
Yeah, we had big cameras out the. There's a porthole on the left side of the aircraft, and one of the missions of the P3, besides anti-submarine warfare, was surveillance. So we'd what's called rig ships, and you drop down to 200 feet, and you do a pattern, and see if you can catch the trawlers, supposedly, that see if they were Russian intel.
So you were looking for the Soviets dropping their buckets from satellites. I'm just kidding. The Soviets couldn't get the satellite there if they tried.
Just a monkey, right?
Just a monkey.
They actually had a manned orbiting platform one time. Had 2 cosmonauts in it. They only actually manned it one time, and that's it. Let it burn up after that, coming in the atmosphere. But they tried to actually have
Knowing the
humans
Soviets probably with the cosmonauts inside of it.
I don't know about that.
Oh, we've left our 2 people up there for a long time.
Yeah, don't.
Coming back soon.
Well, they said that before, but yeah.
Well, actually, I just read something the other day that the rescue launch took place from SpaceX. Yeah.
Right.
So it was last night. Yeah.
It was canceled Wednesday.
No, Wednesdays was canceled.
Yeah, they had a malfunction or indication of a malfunction. Hold the launch. Launched yesterday.
Okay. No, hopefully they're on their way back home. That's all I can say. I'm taking
Great overtime pay though, right?
Yeah. They better get some great hazard pay and overtime pay, I'm telling you. Oh, one thing I do want to do with every one of these segments is get like kind of that one story that stuck with you from your time in, whether it be the goofy guy that you can't just get out of your head that did something stupid and did something funny, whether that be you or somebody else, or the one time that you guys got like in real big trouble from somebody doing something, again, whether it be you or somebody else, something that's funny now that maybe wasn't funny then or was still hilarious then, or that story that just stuck with you because it struck in your feelings. You can remember fondest memory, if you will, from your time in.
I don't think it was the fondest memory, but when I was in the reserves, we one of the detachments was in Misawa, Japan, northern Japan, and we were tracking Soviet subs by the Sea of O. We were supposed to do I think we had a 1 o'clock midnight briefing, and I wanted to see some of the temples in the area. So me and the 2 sensor operators rented a car, and we had this all planned. So we'd have like 6 hours to get back and rest a little and hit the mission. We went down on the west coast of Japan, saw some stuff, and we were going to cut through the area. But like about 40, 50 miles in, there was a 40-foot wall of snow.
Oh,
So I had to go all the way back around to try and get there. I called my senior officer there and told him, we'll probably make it, but just to let you know, we're coming. The problem was I had the 2 sensor operators, which are key to the operation. And one of the hard things was trying to figure out how to use the Japanese phone. And the other thing is, with the map, you had to look at each curve to see where you are on this map because I couldn't read anything. But we got back in time. I had about an hour to spare, but in the meantime, the whole base was lit up. The commander of the base was very pissed off.
no.
And after the mission, I did go on a mission and we completed it successfully. But I guess that's wasn't the point of it. I got what's called put in hock, which they had never used before. But I was relegated to my room, except for flying, and the guys on my crew had to give me plate food.
So you got solitary to your room except for flight hours only.
Yes.
You got grounded.
2 weeks. I got grounded.
Literally.
Yeah. And the skipper, he said I had to do something, and he was super pissed too. So because he got his ass chewed from the admiral there, so that wasn't the funnest time. But the cool thing was the sensor operators, everybody, the flight engineers, they all felt bad for me because I was trying to stick up for these guys.
A good officer sticks up for his people, especially whenever he's the reason why they're getting back later. But
Yeah, so I won't do that again.
well, I mean, you're like one of the only people that got grounded in the military and learned their lesson.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I there was a couple guys that I know that got grounded into the
Yeah.
room for except for training only and formation only, and they did not learn their lesson. They proceeded to do it again because it was the best time that they had because they got to sleep all day instead of doing their job. So it's kind of like the reverse effect.
So that's one thing on detachment. Your only job is to fly the mission.
Yeah,
You know, so you're stuck in there. But
that would eat into your personal time on the base. I can see how that would be successful punishment there.
and back then you didn't have any of the toys you have now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You weren't in your room playing Xbox or
Yeah.
PlayStation,
Read a lot of books, but
doing Call of Duty on the TV in the barracks, just sitting there. Now you're twiddling your thumb, reading a book.
the other
Rereading
situation
the
we had,
newspaper.
that was my first deployment in '81, and I was getting married that summer. And in Wisconsin, it was at the time, and to get the band and the banquet hall, you had to plan like 2 years out. And so we had this date set, and I told the detailer that I need to be in the continental United States during these time frames. And obviously, they said I don't care. So I was in Sigonella, Sicily, and I didn't know until 3 days before whether or not I was going to make my wedding.
Oh,
We had a backup. My brother was going to stand in for me.
so your brother almost married your wife.
Kind of, yeah. But I got there in time, and had the wedding. Had 2 days of honeymoon kind of thing, and then went right back. So the needs of the Navy versus your needs.
Sounds like the answer I was given when I was going to enlist in the Marines. Right out of high school, instead of going in the Army like I would ended up doing, I was set to go into the Marine Reserves. I was not married at the time. I got married 5 days after I graduated high school. I was supposed to ship to Marine Boot that summer. I walked in and told my recruiter, "Hey, I got married yesterday. Congratulations, you're out of the Marines." "What?" "Well, if we wanted you to have a wife, we would have issued you one."
Wow.
"All right, fine, I guess. Didn't know this." Looking back, probably should have listened to the Marines and got the permission first. It would have saved me my first divorce. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, no, the needs of the military versus your personal life, that's been a huge balancing point for a lot of people. And that's kind of funny that
I think that's why you
married
have a lack of attrition, lack of retention, because they're not flexible.
No.
They don't have to be.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, you can't be. There's deadlines
Right.
or stuff like that. There is a clear cut definition and reason why they need you to be where they need you to be when they need you to be there. Do I think that they need to be as hardball as they are with like waiting
Right.
till 3 hours before your flight to tell you that yes, you can go attend your wedding? No.
Yeah.
Especially if you know that your wedding is a state in like, oh, I don't know, 6 months to a year in advance, and you let the command know, hey, this day next year, I'm getting married, and I have the day off. And like the week after that for honeymoon. Cool. Thanks for the heads up. Yeah, we'll make that happen. No, apparently not. No, your brother's going to have to marry your wife instead.
Yeah. Well, look, when you first mentioned that, the first thing that came to mind was uh, my first time in Hawaii. We did a TD wide open to work with the SR-71, which was kind of a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when the captain told us, then we picked 4 of us to go. He mentioned, he said, well, you're not going to be the only people there. You're going to have a lot of other people helping you. And what it was that they're going to have 5 different bases that had reconnaissance units, from people who flew F-4s to places like mine that were full recce units, Hickam, Offutt, several others, DIA in Washington. And so we get there and we report into the building the night before. Next day, we get on a bus and have to go all the way around the base. And in Kadena, where the SR-71's area is, it's on the other side of everything else, there's 4 hangars. The first 3 have SR-71s. The last one has what they call a photo processing facility. Basically, they're big trailers all hooked together with light-tight doors to them and everything else. You go in and out. And that's where you have the processing of the film, duplication, photo interpreters are there, everything else.
The mobile red room.
Right. So it was us and some people from Offutt, which a couple of guys I actually knew. So being in Intel, it was a smaller community, so you knew several of the people there.
Right.
And we have looking on our second week there, and all of a sudden the plane next to us is the actual one that's going to be doing the mission. So we hadn't seen an actual SR taking off, out of the hangar and everything. So we're over there, we do all our prep work, a couple hours ahead of the flight. So we have everything ready. And most of us are staying in the doorway between us and the hangar where the SR is actually going. And the one I came over, one of the crew chiefs says, hey, guys, just don't walk into the hangar too much, right? Okay. So we're in the front hangar, watching, and we're watching these guys. They put the big Buick motors in there to start the engines and everything else, We're just having a good time.
It takes a motor to start a motor.
2 motors. 2 Buick 455s in line to turn it enough.
Yeah, that's a lot of horsepower.
It is. And they're loud. They're really loud.
I don't imagine they put exhausts on them. It's probably straight headers.
No, they don't. And they're heavy too. But it must be like 10 of us standing at the front door. It's fairly big doorway between the hangars. And all of a sudden we notice this commotion behind the plane, after they started up. We're like, what's going on back there? And I said, don't worry about it. So plane gets up, they taxi out, and it's gone. So okay, let's go back and do some more prep work, and when we walk in, there's this one young lady from Omaha, and she's sitting there crying and just bawling her eyes out. And we're like, okay, something happened. We all go out and do our own little thing. We didn't find out until the after party, which after every mission, after you're done processing the film and everything, everybody usually gets together in one of the rooms, just have a little blow up kind of thing.
Air Force things.
Here,
Navy does it too.
Yeah.
Fine pilot things.
So we were talking. Hey, Jack, talking with senior SO from off. I said, so what happened to your girl there? He goes, you'll never believe her. Here it is, the plane starting up. She was thirsty. She walks behind the SR-71 as they're starting the engines.
Oh no!
If you ever seen an SR-71 start, when it kicks in, you've got that little green flame of that. I can't remember the name of the chemical that's in it that actually does a starting, but it throws a flame out the back. She just no conscience. The sodas were over there. That's when she walked over to get a soda. So she got chewed out big time for that. And so it's like
she's lucky she didn't get literally scolded.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I mean, you see no maintenance guys on either side of that plane except they're along the walls, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she just walks across it like nothing.
You never walk behind the engine.
Oh, that's just like
planes and horses. Don't walk behind them.
Right, unless you know the horse. The horses are okay if you know them.
Unless you know not to walk behind that one.
But again, it was like, how could she not know something like that? Or the safety type stuff.
Yeah. Or at least follow the instructions of the person who literally said, "Don't go in the hangar."
But we knew that was going to be an interesting TDY when we were over there. I mean, that was like I say, about a week after we were there. But when we first got there, for the second day there, we come up to the gate in the front, and there's a security guard. There's like three security guys at the front gate there. And the guys, you got a line badge? Yeah, so we give them our line badge. Well, our line badges are from Hawaii. Of course, linebackers from Moffett, and so the one guy's back there, he's like, what are these? Those are our line badges. Well, they're from Hickam. Well, yeah. They told us to bring them. What are we going to do? So we were there probably maybe 45 minutes to an hour.
I was going to say at least an hour.
And then we're just waiting there, we're just kind of like hanging out, but the first thing that happens is I'm sitting there and I kind of like want to lean back against the wall. I go back like this and I hear, oh, there's a canine. I'm like, well, he was back there, I just gradually went up like, but finally after a while they said, okay, yeah, I know one senior cop came out, it was a captain, I think. He says, yes, we're going to have 5 units here. Didn't you see the bulletin board? Well, I thought I read something about that, but I wasn't sure. He said, well, good thing you checked. But, yeah, we're going to have 5 different bases of people coming here to support our operations. So if you've ever been to Canina, you walk in, and straight ahead of you is where they have all the computer labs together, and they're running. There's a blockhouse down the block. Then there's a ramp hill to go up to where the actual hangars are.
Okay.
So we get through the gate, and we're starting to walk up this hill. We get halfway up the hill, and a truck goes by us, screeching on the brakes. Doors fly open. Freeze, down the ground. More cops. They didn't get the word either. So here we are, 4 of us spread eagle on the ground, it's like, talk to your captain. We're supposed to be here. So that's how I knew it was going to be. Don't shoot. It was going to be a great PDY after that. It's like, oh, that was fun. I had some fun times, but that was the scariest moment was when they found out that she walked behind the SR-71. Poof.
Yeah. Well, when you started telling that story, I immediately was like, you're talking about the jet spinning up, and you heard a commotion back behind. I was like, oh no, somebody got fried.
It happens way too often.
Yeah, I'm not even in the aerospace field, and I know about don't walk behind the jets. You're on a base.
We had one guy in the P3s. One of our guys, I don't know, he wasn't thinking with big, huge props, big, huge plates. If they're spinning, you can't really see them. So he was trying to get the chocks or something, and he hit the blade perfectly and bounced back.
Oh,
it's like this isn't going to ever happen again.
He's lucky he didn't walk through that and like that scene in Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Sidebar note: did you guys know that in that movie, the reason why they cut away from that scene in the Indiana Jones movie is because that stunt double actually did go through the blades?
Oh, really?
Oh.
And the wishes of the family, they didn't want the scene cut out, but because it was like the scene, but they didn't want it shown that him actually going in the blades. But somebody actually went through the blades of the plane.
It happens more often than you think. It's very, very dangerous.
It's bad with helicopters too. Like I've heard some bad stories of people jumping out too early on the chopper, or not waiting for the hand signal to get into them when they land. People getting.
That's why they really try and drill into you. These are the danger areas behind the planes.
Yeah,
in front of the planes.
Everybody that looks at the movies and they see, especially Navy pilots and fight pilots, fighter pilots, and everything else, they go, "Oh, this is a cool guys. They just get to jump in a plane and go and have fun, and they don't have a care in the world about anything." They don't realize how much safety aspect that y'all's job has. There's probably more safety rules in place than there is in even.
Yeah, and the sad thing with regarding safety is a lot of these safety procedures were written in blood, especially with the airlines. Yeah. Unfortunately,
no, the rules weren't there until they were needed.
Right.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow, but I'm glad I'm glad they do something about it instead of just, oh well, let's not have that happen again, and then not do anything to change the policy.
Right.
Like at least they taken under advisement, I'll say. Whenever
look at the crash in DC. How quickly they stopped the helicopter flying there.
Mm-hmm.
It'll take a while to develop new routes and everything, but they did something immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's that critical.
She said they're even letting military fly in the DC area. I said, well, you can't stop them from flying because if there's another crisis, they're going to be flying. So you got to train that way.
Right. You want to train to get the big shots out.
Yep.
You have to do it.
Yeah.
Just you got to do it at the right altitude.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe swerve out of the way if there's a plane in your path instead of cutting up into it.
Oh, with
That-
the, you know,
That's what I just can't understand. How can you not see plane clear night, lights flashing all over them because you've got markers on the side, you got the strobe on the top, strobe on the bottom, tail lights flashing. I'm like, how could you not?
well, they had the night vision goggles on, so
No.
They did.
that's what I understand.
Okay, I didn't
So
hear that.
you got a
Right. If they had night
very
vision,
narrow field of vision.
but I thought if one had them on, the other one didn't.
That doesn't mean the other one's paying attention.
Yeah.
To be fair.
And there's normally that's why they want to add another crew chief on there. That'd be an extra set of eyes. That one didn't have it, so that I'm sure that changed since the incident.
Oh, I'm sure it's probably 3-man requirement no matter what.
Yeah.
No deviations.
3 or 4.
I do know that the flight hours and for helicopters, a buddy of mine knows a couple people, night stalkers, which are the nighttime helicopters. The flight hours they have to go through in nighttime hours with the night vision goggles is insane. But he did say the flying with night vision goggles it's like putting a fishbowl on your head and trying to swim around.
Whole different ball game.
Yeah, it's nothing quite. It's not even close to flying the way that most people know how to fly. So I don't know how to fly. Period. I would love to learn to fly a helicopter. That's been a goal of mine for a long time. I wouldn't pass a flight exam now, unfortunately. So now, as far as since you brought up the plane crash and all that, do you think there was something else at play there other than just the night vision? Do you think that?
Well, the controller obviously. They were supposed to have 2 controllers, and lack of coordination. The controller not providing specific enough instructions, or at 11 o'clock high, or whatever, to say this is the other aircraft. Because I would think they probably saw the plane landing to the north instead of the plane landing on northwest runway 33. Because they did say
they had an improper designation on runway landing.
No, it's just the controller, because there was basically 2 planes, so they saw one of them, but not the other one.
Okay.
And it was pure lack of communication on.
How did he not see the other? Don't correct me if I'm wrong. From my very limited understanding, but don't planes have to call into the tower to request permission to land?
Yep.
So if the other one's even circling, they're at least waiting for a response. So it shouldn't be in the immediate airspace, right?
The plane or the helicopter?
Planes, both planes.
They were clear to land. They do that a lot in DC. I used to fly in and out of there a lot.
Okay.
In the civilian world, anyways. And just to maximize the flow of the aircraft, you have the smaller aircraft circle land 3-3, and the other guys land right after that. There's still issues. Could be the altimeter. Altimeter was off. As with any accident, you have to really you won't really know the information until about a year out.
Yeah. Especially whenever the military is involved, we all know them is slower.
Yeah.
And then speaking on the military helicopter aspect of it, it's also military equipment, so it's very possible there's an equipment failure on the craft. It's made by the cheapest bidder. So
True. Yeah. Although mil spec is very expensive.
yeah, very expensive crap.
We're trying to get rid of that right now, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you ever ridden or driven a Humvee? You know.
It's not for comfort.
No, and it should not exceed 40 miles an hour.
And they get to 40 miles an hour.
Oh, yeah, you can get to 55.
Downhill. Can I feel one?
Yeah, exactly. Should not go 55 ever. Do not try to drive one of those down the interstate.
But see,
It's the
the
scariest
big thing
ever.
about them, you can't roll them. Or if you do, it's very, very hard because we tried in Panama. We really did.
They can be rolled once. Good luck re-rolling them over unless you've got a giant wrecker or a crane. But I've seen them on the roof.
Wow. Were you in it at the time?
No. This was post-hand pictures from guys that deployed overseas. But I got a picture, not with me, but of my buddy and one of his other squad mates standing on the tires of a flipped over Humvee. Now, granted, it flipped because they put a rocket under it, but it still flips.
Okay. I thought I was going to ask that.
Yeah, we tried going on the side of a hill, it was a pretty steep hill in Panama. And we're like this trying to, it would not go over. It would not go over.
I got to hear the rest of that story. Why were you trying to flip a Humvee?
Well, in Panama, you had this little thing back in 94, the Haitians, being all sent over, and Guantanamo Bay was getting full really quick. They wanted some other place to put them. Well, they didn't want to put them, well, they didn't have room in Garcia for them, and they want to take them to the States. So they said, let's put them in Panama. So
naturally,
everybody in Panama on a Saturday morning went out and we put up tents. Those big, huge Army green tents that nobody likes to be in, But we had small air conditioning units for them, Yeah, oh, yeah, they're terrible. But trying to ground stakes into these rocks was really hard to do. Well, you're out there, and they give us a box lunch for free, like, oh, hey, great. We're out here in the hot, sweating Panamanian, countryside.
Just what I want is an MRE.
But the one guy, we only had 3 guys that had Humvee licenses. And the one guy I worked with pretty close. He was a photo guy as well. And he said, let's go grab something back at the chow hall, and bring it out to the guys, Being the acting first sergeant, I said, good idea. I said, you come with me. And there was like 3 of us. And so we're going on. And so we're going along. And he says, they say you can't roll. He said, let's try. And so on a whim, we all try and we try to do this, and it didn't work.
So we're going to pause for just a second. The acting first sergeant of the battalion is the one that came up with the idea, or sanctioned.
I
sanctioned the idea to try to roll the company Humvee.
I did. Actually, it wasn't our Humvee. It was from the motor. We didn't have a Humvee with the intel squadron.
So it wasn't yours.
So it wasn't even yours. It was borrowed equipment.
Borrowed.
Drive it like you stole it, I guess.
Exactly.
It's hilarious.
The guys were very grateful that we brought back some stuff from the chow hall. It was a lot better than what they gave us on box lunches. So, all in all, it was a good thing.
Air Force.
I brought this. My last tour, like I say, was at Scott Air Force Base, which whenever we do a deployment, and this one is the one from Somalia, we send combat camera guys over. They take pictures of everything. And these are pictures that get brought back and briefed to the generals, and all the dignitaries, briefed to the Pentagon, DIA, CIA, whoever else wants to get copies. They can get copies of these pictures. But when the mission's done, they put this thing together. And what you've got is CDs of different things with images on, of the best images of whatever one it is. And so there's ones of like Somalia, Haiti, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, things like that. So these are put out probably by Combat Camera, maybe 6 months to a year after the actual operation is over. So that's what one of these is for. So this is an extra one. You can have that.
Thank you.
That's not a problem. And I can still remember when I was in Scott Air Force Base, we were doing it was between Gulf War I and Gulf War II. And some pictures came in, and this one lieutenant said, I love this shot. I want to have this in the briefing. I said, sir, that's not going to be a good thing to put in the briefing. What do you mean? It's great. It shows what it was a chow hall, right? In a tent in the desert, right? Well, desert area. I said, but sir, it's not a good picture to show to general. I really don't think this is what yeah, the guys are in line. And so, Lieutenant, I want to have it in. Okay, so I put it in the briefing, At that point, we've gone from flip slides, over overheads to actual digital, so they can do, PowerPoints.
Yeah, so Microsoft PowerPoint is out at this point.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, this was 95. So, been Office 95. with PowerPoint. So he gets this picture,
Windows
and
95.
I'm up in the back in the projection booth, right? And this picture comes up, Joe goes, "What the hell is that?"
No.
And the lieutenant goes, "That's the chow hall, sir." No, what's she doing? I can't. What it was, the cook, one of those big, huge things to make pancake batter, had her arm like this.
Oh no.
So between the reflection off the kettle and reflection off the batter and reflection off her arm, it looked like one big mess. And he goes, "What's she doing?" Me and the guy upstairs were laughing. And Lieutenant's trying to explain it away. But that's the kind of pictures that don't make it into this. Because as a photographer, you're looking at that, you're like, nah, that's not a good composition of anything. I would never have that in there. But he put it in there. Now, unfortunately, because Combat Camera is not a separate organization by itself anymore, these aren't being produced anymore. So, like I say, that's from Somalia. And I can't even remember which ones are in there now. It's been so long since I've actually looked at it. But like I say, they should do one of those for every major operation we used to do.
That is awesome. I will make sure that stays very safe. Thank you very much for that.
Cool.
And we'll put some of those pictures up on the channel for people to take a look at too. Kind of, they're already digitized, but
Oh, yes.
internet ties them a little bit. That way they're still out there for people to enjoy and see themselves. Did you process any of these photos?
I may have processed some of the ones going to the briefings at the time, yes. And that was one of the things that we had to go through. I say it was just the infancy of digital cameras being used, and having the modem lines.
Mm-hmm.
We had guys that got sent to Africa in different little areas where we were doing some different things. And the one guy plugged his modem into the landline, which was put in like 1947. And of course, being in Africa, what's the current over there? Somewhere between 100 and 220 volts.
Give or take.
Give or take. And what happened was he fried the modem on his Apple computer. So he had to call back.
There's his first problem. He's running an Apple.
Well, that's what they were going with. The Air Force said they were going to use Apples for all their digitizing because at the time they were doing both video and stills.
Nah.
So Apple had the advantage in the 90s with motion picture versus.
I mean, that's still their go-to as far as the way they operate now. Apple's big thing for Mac and everything else is for creators.
Right, exactly.
Microsoft is for the people who go to work.
But he had to call back to the headquarters and tell them, he says, "Hey, my modem's fried. I can't do anything. I can't send any pictures, blah, blah, blah." Hey, so we got one 40 miles away. So he had to go drive 40 miles to some other place with somebody else's computer to transmit what he had. So by that time it was, didn't make the initial cut anyway, but made the afternoon cut. So. But that was an interesting time, that transition of going from film to actual digital to having stuff overnight.
Yeah.
This was what's actually happening on the ground. Especially when we had the buildups between Gulf War I and Gulf War II, we're sending people over there. I mean, down at Fort Bragg, they had it wasn't Fort Bragg, it was in Texas. I can't remember the Army base down there.
Which one?
They have a lot of tanks.
Bliss?
It was Fort Bliss. But what they had done in order to load the tanks more efficiently into the aircraft, they had taken old railroad ties and built a ramp. So you didn't have to have the back end of the plane come down to the ground and then going up. They had it coming level and would drive straight in.
Oh.
And when the back tip gate came down, was actually resting on a bunch of those railroad ties, so it wasn't putting any strain on that back door.
Okay.
Because a lot of damage happened on the back door when the tanks go up to go into the planes. The new C-17s at the time, right? Or the C-5s that were down. So things like that, that were interesting for the guys to actually show the commanders, this is what's happening here, this is what's happening here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't believe for 1 second that a 22-ton tank can bend a plane door, though. You're out of your mind.
It wasn't the door itself; it was the hydraulics and everything else that were problems.
Yeah. In that same area you guys were in, and before, it's kind of the transition time between the drafted versus the volunteers. the people that were drafted in the military versus people that were strictly volunteering for service. Which one were you guys, and what do you feel about one or the other? Which one's better?
I went in right before the end of the Vietnam War, so I was probably still in the draft type thing. But at that point, again, like President Clinton said, he says my number was a high number, so I have to worry, right? They weren't taking as many people in at the time because they were trying to wind down Vietnam at the time.
Right.
Even though we were still fighting over there was still battles going on. It was still on the news almost every single night. They were still drawing it down. What I realized was not necessarily then, but when I was in Panama getting ready to think about my last assignment and my getting out and retiring, young lady came down to Panama. She was a E4, I believe, and she was going to school on base. Well, normally our missions would fly during the daytime, and we'd process the film at night. For our interdiction places we want to try and get.
Right.
The guy who was in charge of the photo lab at the time, good buddy of mine, Jerry Walrath, his policy was you can go to school for one semester, okay, and then you have to let other people have the time to be off because you were gone from 8 to like 9:30, 10 o'clock in the evening, so from the classes and everything else. Well, by 10 o'clock, they're getting ready to start winding things down. They're usually done by midnight, the processing all the film and getting all the intel done.
Right.
Well, she came to me as a first acting first sergeant and says, "Hey," she says, "Sergeant Walrath isn't allowing me to go to class." I said, "What?" "Yeah," he says, "I can't go to class." That's all she's telling me, right? So okay, no problem. So I go around and talk to Jerry. I said, "Jerry, what's up with this girl?" "Oh man, she's a pain." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "This is my policy, Mark." Explain. I said, "Okay, that sounds good." Well, she don't like the fact that she can't go this semester. Okay, she went last semester, right? Yeah. But nobody's going this semester, so she feels she should be able to go again. No. So, after all that information, I asked her to come back up to the office next time she came in. She came up and shut the door. I said, "So why do you think that you should go?" And she said, "Well, I want to get my degree and get out." So you came in the military just to get your degree. Well, yeah, I had 2 years before I couldn't pay for it, so I figured I'd come in the military and get my degree and get out.
Well,
That was her whole focus.
but isn't that part of the GI Bill? I mean, it was. I think you go into an extreme, but
It is, and I said, so you can go when you get out. I mean, it's like it's not everything, but this policy here, this is our mission. It's a very fair policy for everybody. If everybody knows what's going on, if he lets you go every single time,
you said this.
one, it's preferential treatment. Two, you're not doing the job the Air Force is paying you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I need to get my degree before I get out. That's all her focus was.
Plus, like you hear the stories about people not wanting to go on deployment. I didn't sign up for deployment. Yes, you did.
Yes, you did. Okay, there's a difference between people who didn't get deployed and people who try to avoid deployment.
Yeah. Right.
Like the guys who get married right away on basics to their battle booze, and so they don't have to deploy to dangerous situations.
But that's really when I realized that the shift that had come to having an all-volunteer force. And I had known other people that had been in, and their primary focus was to get a degree. But they were long-term. They wanted to get your degree while they were in, maybe get their master's while they were in. So when they got out, they use their GI Bill to get a doctorate or, something else,
Right.
Which made perfect sense to me. But this was the first person that actually said, "I just came in to get my degree, and that was it."
I think this is just strict college. What is this for you?
Yeah, this is like it's like a place you go for college with a tour of a foreign country once in a while.
Yeah, you're not a foreign exchange student.
So I don't know if you had anything about since you came in a little later.
No. So I graduated in '75. My friend in my class, he was old. He was a year older than me, but he had a number. But by that time, like I said, it was winding down. I think the thought process of the draft. I think this is my personal opinion, but that everybody should have some dedicated service after high school. either like the Peace Corps.
Israelis.
Yes, something to serve your country and serve the people. So you come with that mindset. I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Not in this country.
No, some people in this country, as pointed as they can be and as helpful as they can be in the civilian sector, because there's some great business people out there that just would not cut it in the military.
True.
Like the great business minds, terrible followers. They're born to lead their company. Fine, great, fantastic. You put them in a position where they have to take orders, and they'll be the first ones in the stockades. Any regrets? Anything you'd do differently, military or civilian?
I think I might have stayed in '85. Looking
For the
back,
active, or
for active duty, do the 20 years, and a lot of guys when I was at USAR and JetBlue, they did their 20. They moved right in the airlines and got up. But you look at a little. They had a lot more deployments to deal with, and we were fortunate we didn't have any children until after I got out. So, but a lot of our my tackle, he had 3 young kids when we were flying out of SIG. And it's a little different thought process there.
yeah, kids definitely complicate deployments and even military service. Period.
Yeah.
I can speak firsthand on that one. Not the deployments, obviously.
Yeah, and I think it takes a special kind of spouse, male or female, to deal with the separations.
Oh yeah.
It seems like all the guys in my squadron, the spouses that went back to their families instead of joining the wives club or whatever, almost all of them got divorced very quickly because the families were saying, "How dare your husband or wife leave?"
They're not being supportive to you. You're handling everything. You're a single parent as it is already. You might as well just go ahead and divorce them and collect the alimony.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I wouldn't call it a regret, but something I probably might have done a little differently is when I was in, I was very honest about was someone asked me an opinion of something. I probably did not make rank because of it.
I don't know, Pershard.
Just for the well, as soon as now that's a good segue because the guy who took over from me because he came down, he had a line number for senior, even though he was junior to me as far as in rank E7.
Mm-hmm.
He had a line number for senior, so he outranked me technically. So he became the first sergeant. Nobody went to him. Everybody hated him because he was one of the guys that, as long as studied the books, high grades on the test, few accommodations, got promoted.
So not meritorious promotion, but mandatory promotion.
More or less, yeah. And see, I was on to give an example, on St. in Panama. We were only there, I was only there just under 2 years. But we had a major come down. This was his first squadron commander position ever. It's a major. First leadership position outside the Pentagon.
Oh,
He went to the Pentagon as a butterboard. Came there as a major.
There's no leadership.
He went to school.
that's where all the leadership's at, and nobody leads.
He took the schools, right? So he knew.
Oh yeah.
So we're getting ready to wind down, and I was talking to Gilpin, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "it's nice that all us senior NCOs get a meritorious service." And I said, "Pardon me? We're getting an MSM for being here less than 2 years? Because most of us had been there less than 2 years." "Well, yeah, we're all going to get an MSM." And I said, "Every senior? Which you include?" "Oh, yeah." He said, I got them on my desk. I said, "That's not right." I said, the guys, the junior guys that were down here that got shot up by the Peruvians, yeah, they deserve an MSM. Definitely. They've been here 3-4 years. Us senior guys, we've only been here less than 2. I said, I have not done, okay, yeah, we had the boat lift, we had the Haitians come down, we had several other things going on, but an MSM? No, that's just not possible. So I went to the wing first sergeant. I told him, I said, this is what's going on. I said, I'm not the first sergeant anymore. but this is the way I feel. I don't deserve one. I know that, that he doesn't deserve one either. So of course, the senior first sergeant talked to the wing commander. Wing commander talked to my commander. Okay, he downgraded the ones that he should have downgraded to commendation medals.
Okay.
But the major commander says, "Why don't you want an MSM?" I said, "It's not what I want, sir. I don't deserve to have that." Being honest, right?
Yeah.
But he's like, but you guys, it's going to be good for your promotion, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, maybe Senior Selected Gilpin wants one for making chief. So that's just not me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not an honest thing of what the Air Force goes to. But I realized, and that's another thing that kind of put me on the road of not even wanting to become a CE8 promotion. And I'm glad I didn't, because my next assignment at Scott Air Force Base, my boss was a senior, been around for quite a few years. And that was at headquarters of MAC. We had our combat camera guys come in once a year for conference. I helped set it up, get the hosting for the social hour, and the food for the daily briefings and stuff like that, and got everything ready. And so 2 days before the conference, guy comes up to me, my senior, and goes, "Mark," he says, "You got the next 2 days. I got things to do." I said, "What?" "I made chief, so I got to get things ready." I said, "Line numbers don't come out for 3 days." "Oh, yeah, but the headquarters chief called me, so I made it." So he was going to be the only one. Only one in all of photo in the Air Force was made chief of one guy. That was him. And then he wondered why I missed his big bash that he had instantly planned, after this conference. The announcement was officially made, right? Back in his house, his wife had all this stuff out and everybody to come. He said, "Why'd you come last night?" I said, "Because I think what you and the other chiefs done is not the way I would do things. If you're supposed to be not released until that day, then that's the day you release it." I said, "There's no integrity." "Well, I don't think of it that way." "Well, Chief Jennings, Selectee Jennings, I'm sorry, I can't feel that way." From that point on, I just wanted to get out.
It gets very political.
It did, and that was the transition. Was the fact that it wasn't the transition of going from a draft to a civilian. It was getting the fact that during the 90s, it just started to get more and more political.
Yeah, that general rank politics. It's always been there, because it's always been a political rank structure. And once you get into the brigadier general and up from there,
that's why you have to appease your ultimate.
Yeah, and that major superiors that was our commander went back to the Pentagon and made brigadier. Surprise, surprise. I found that out. I'm like, what is this here? Again, it's like we won a war, World War II, over 1.5 million men in uniform with 5 4-star generals. In the Pentagon right now, we have 36 4-star generals. Doing
so far.
So far.
Yeah, I'm sure Pete's going to take care of some of these guys. But again, it's like, what are they all doing? Why do you have to have so many 4 stars and all in one building?
Yeah, well, I can understand a need for more general leadership in a time of war if you're going to have more units. We also have substantially more units than we did in World War II. I will give credit for that. We've got a lot more special forces units. We got a lot more basic units, a whole new branch that we didn't have then.
Space Force.
So I understand the need for more leadership. If it was actually leadership, like if they were actually battlefield generals like they used to be, where they were out on deployments with the rest of their unit.
Like Storm and Norman.
Yeah. If they were like that, fine. I could definitely see the need for general ranks and actual rank structure in these units in the field. But there's a reason why they don't call them field grade generals anymore. They're just called the general ranks.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you hit brigadier, you're only out in the field like what? Maybe once or twice an entire war for a photo op. Every other time you're back in DC or your base of operations and making decisions from there based off of intelligence. Which, yes, we rely on that to be by the minute, but you don't have the stories of the Custards and the Pattons anymore because there's no generals out there on the field leading their troops. And that's another thing that's leading to the morale issues in the field, too. You don't have these hard charging leaders for them to look to because they're looking at field grade officers, which are no different than, sorry if I'm going to piss any of you off, you're no different than junior NCOs or not even NCO guys yet. You're literally the early stages of enlisted guys.
I think that's going to be changing, though. I'm hoping.
I hope so. Do we need as many? No, I don't think we need as many. But I don't know. It's kind of one of those balancing acts. Leadership needs to come back at the top level, and it'll snowball down to help morale. Morale's gone right now with a lot of them because they don't have real leadership. You've got first sergeants and them that are trying to make sergeant major decisions at the battalion level because they don't have the sergeant major that gives a crap enough to make the decision for them anymore. Thankfully, the Army has a good sergeant major of the Army right now. It's doing fantastic changes for them, although I think his focus on uniform changes was a little out of pocket. Another uniform for them to have to buy is just what they needed. But
they should be given that.
Don't get me started on that.
That's what they get the allowance for.
Yeah, the measly $50 a month allowance to buy a $700 uniform and get your hair cut.
Right.
And
keep everything else in shape.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, we go through SIP, right? Like, you get issued your uniforms, but then you have to buy your uniform. Like, it doesn't make any sense. If you're going to issue them, issue them. If you're going to make them buy them, make them buy them. But it means a pay raise to be able to afford those uniforms. Like, it is what it is. I'm not gonna go down that road any further than I already have because I could talk an hour and a half on that alone. But no, leadership. I mean, we have an officer and we have an enlisted here. And what do you view in your position in leadership individually versus your leaders above you and how you would change if you were in their position? And I'm not in depth one, but just like a question.
Well, like with the story with being in Hawk, and supporting my guys, and they appreciate it, and it's a sign of respect. But I think the leader always has to support his men or women.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sign of a true leader. It's not just in name only, or you got this rank because of whatever. That has to be a given.
Yeah,
I think, and it's just my own personal opinion, of course. In the intel community, we had, I think, a fairly good crop of leaders, especially senior NCOs. Once in a while, there was a bad one in there, that you wouldn't want to be around. But to give you an example, I know that when we were doing night missions in Hawaii, doing processing of film that came in late last minute or whatever, we had planned overnight. A lot of times, commander would come in, full bird colonel. He's in civilian clothes, comes back in and says, "How's it going, guys? Grab a cup of coffee pour his own coffee, sit down. So how's it going? What problems you guys got?" And the senior in charge was more important to him to figure out when the next social was going to be, when the next fun run was going to be, like that. And so the next morning, we're in the daily brief, of course. I'm flipping slides on the old view scans, And he says, "Yeah." He said, "Well, they had a problem with the mission last night." And Chief goes, "What do you mean they had a problem with the mission? I didn't hear anything." "Well, yeah, I was in talking to him, "Oh, you were in, sir?" And you could hear him backpedaling, what, well, I should, yeah. From then on, he was in. Every time we had a night mission come in or something overnight, he would be there. Just in case the colonel happened to pop in. But that's the only reason he did it. It wasn't to see how the troops are going,
Yeah.
And most of the time, other places, definitely you'd have a senior NCO from the group come in, or from the squadron would come in and say, "How's it going? Everything going okay? Any problems? You guys got enough men? You got enough of supplies going on? That kind of thing." So I think, and that's one thing I liked about the intel community. I think we had a better crop of leaders that were willing to step up and do things the way they should have been done, or had been done and worked successfully. That's what that.
Right. I think that comes into more like to get into that profession where you're at, you put a lot of time and effort and energy to do that job specifically. There's a lot more training involved with that. Early stages of the field intelligence community, which is what I'm a little more familiar with, talking with the guys and working with the guys I've worked with. It took substantially more training to be able to do that kind of career. Like you were talking about first stages of some of the special forces branches we have now. Rangers for reconnaissance, stuff like that. It wasn't just, hey, sign up for a job, go to 6 weeks of training, show up on a position, or even some of the other jobs that take a little bit longer training, but it's still one training. You know what I mean? You go and a year's worth of training, but it's back to back to back to back in pretty much the same base, what they call O suit now. Instead, you got, okay, well, I'm going here for this training, going here for this training. Even if I'm going back to the same base or on the same base, I'm doing something entirely different for this training. Until you would have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in your case, you'd have tech classes, you'd have language classes, you'd have your actual military training, which you went to in basic and all that, and then you're going to have the other area specific training pre-deployment that you got to go to, like hazardous area training or whatever the case may be for where you're getting deployed.
Of course, there's always mobility training no matter where you go.
Exactly.
I mean, first mobility right there in Omaha, my first duty station. We actually had to set up a portable processing facility, and our processing off of cameras from an RF4 or a U2 was basically you put this spool of film on this side, you run it over to a spool on this side, you pour a developer in it, and you turn it by hand.
Well, that wouldn't work for the film. It's like
paper thin. No. This is old school film, the old thicker stuff.
Okay.
But it was just a matter of like, you're kidding me. And so we do have a motor wind, but we're not sure if it works. So it was basically a motor unit you set over top of it, and it would go like. So it'd take twice as long or 3 times as long to process the film. And it's like, no, I'll just crank it. When I get tired, hey, George will take over. And when he gets done, Peg will take over. But it was
just get the wooden spoon.
Right. But it's that individuality of that when you go there. And like I said, that was when I first went. That was the late 70s. And like I say, by the time I got to Kadena, well, then you had the parting processing facilities, which were, motorized everything, your pre-inspection. Of course, you're going through 60,000 feet of film. Right. That's quite a lot.
That's a lot of this motion.
Yeah. You don't have it. I mean, you still had a B cart, which was 34 inches in diameter, but you had to test the edges in case there was a wrinkle or something like that. So you're still there for almost 45 minutes, the film going from this side to that side, motorized, where the foot puts, and so after once in a while you get tired and you take off this, the other foot down. But it was still, it was a modernization, but it was still something you had to learn that wasn't part of any kind of training because no school would have it, right? No other base would have what other bases would have on hand at the time. So, yeah.
So that comes down to the OJT on each base you go to.
Lots of OJT.
The little nuances of each base. Battlefield promotions from back World War II era. You guys didn't have very many of those. We'll call it battlefield promotions.
No.
But it sounds like you were the closest one to what we would call that now, where you get a field grade promotion. But it's more of a billet, not really a promotion.
They try to institute that in the Air Force. Now, during my career, it was kind of weird because I had junior ROTC, which meant I went into basic training with 1 stripe. I was an E2, automatically basic training. Everybody's like, well, how'd you get a stripe? What are you doing with it? 3 years of ROTC in high school, Oh, okay. Well, E2, E3, then E4. And in the Air Force at the time, in the late 70s, it was called sergeant. Well, the Air Force didn't like the fact that these people were going through 3.5 years, becoming a sergeant and getting out, usually after 4-year enlistment. So now they have this new grade called senior airman. You're an E4, getting paid for an E4, but instead of having a silver star in the center, you had a blue star in the center of your stripes. So what does this mean? And that's when I started having those guys go to a professional military class for a week. So then I guess
yes, the NCO courses.
yes. So then I got through that. So then I second enlistment, then I became a sergeant, which means I just had to buy whole new stripes for my uniforms. Not really using that money right yet.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so now I got all new stripes, and it's the same type of rank, what is it? Going to a few years later, the stripes we had, you made E7, you had your normal 3 stripes and 3 rockers underneath, right? They decided to change that. They're going to be more like the Army. You're now going to have, if you're an E7, 2 rockers below and 1 above. So I went from having 6 stripes to having 5 down and 1 up. So I had, again, all new brand. And I'm like, this is crazy, And then there goes and of course, you got your whole complement, your BDUs, your normal, your dress blues, and your formals, if you had formals, which formal stripes were like, this was back in the mid-90s, formal stripes were like $22 a set at the time. Well, they were like silver and all those fancy stuff on them.
They better use real silver for that price.
Well, yeah. But that's just the way that they didn't have that. But during when they had the actual senior airman type thing, they did have and this was probably back in the early mid '80s, is they had promotions, automatic promotions, and they usually gave like 5 to a command every year. Well, being a headquarters SAC, that was kind of one of the big things. If you were on base, you had a possibility of getting an automatic promotion, once a year.
Right.
I remember they only had one promotion that year, and the headquarters of SAC gave it to his driver.
Yeah, no favoritism.
You talk about the morale of the base going downhill real quick.
Yeah.
When they find out, and they said, "Well, he's doing a great job of driving around in a nice." And at the time, I think it was like a Bel Air.
I could see if he flipped over to Humvee.
Well, yeah, something like that. No,
It's not like he's driving a General around in a Rolls Royce with AC and heat all day long.
Right. But that was a nice thing about it. Is that before that would happen, our squadron commander would once in a while he'd have the opportunity to actually present somebody, and so you get stepped from being an E4 to an E5, or an E2 to an E3 kind of thing. And it was just a matter of that. It helped a little bit as far as morale goes until that incident, with the driver. And after that, it was like, and I'm sure that got back to the Pentagon too.
Oh yeah.
And so after that, they kind of phased that out.
Yeah.
Not having
Watch, that's the reason why they phased it out.
I don't know if that's the
One
reason.
bad apple
Just
ruined the
shortly
bunch
after
yet
that,
again.
like 2 years later, that was gone. They never had those things again.
Yeah. I talked to some guys, some older guys, not recording, obviously. First episode here. But, like my granddad's generation, World War II, like guys would be out in the field, not because just because people were dying, but because like they were in a situation and they showed good leadership in their squad or something like that. They go from being a private or private first class, and they get a field grade promotion. They'd be a corporal or a spec 4 or spec 5 or something like that in the field, and then make their way up that way. There's a story I heard. I don't remember where I heard it. I'll have to get back to you guys on that one. But the guy started out as a drummer in the Civil War, little drummer boy, and then ended up getting promoted all the way up. That was in the military until World War One, and was a general by the time he was done.
Wow.
He went from the drummer boy to being a sergeant. And I think this was like 19. He was a first sergeant or something like that at the age of 19. And then in World War II, or World War One, sorry, World War One, he was a like brigadier general or something like that, in charge of an entire outfit. And the guy was talking about it, where he's like, "Can you imagine being in the unit where your general is so hardcore that you talking to people?" And yeah, he was He had more bodies stacked before you were out of diapers. He wasn't even an adult yet. He had already had, during the Civil War, neutralized one of the enemies in the Civil War with a gun as the drummer boy. He had a flintlock that he picked up from somebody else that was gone, and he was told to surrender, and then he goes, nope, and then taking out one of the enemy combatants at like 14 years old.
Well, I mean, some people just have natural leadership skills and natural can-do attitude, where others are followers. There's the leaders and the followers.
And it takes both kinds to operate in any
It does.
in the world.
Right. Sometimes there's too many leaders.
Yeah. Sometimes. But, all right, well, thank you guys. That
was great.
Very successful.
Thanks for the cup.
Yeah.
They still on me. They still return.
So this is no trial. This is not a trial run. This is a
I don't know. Is it?
sucker.
I already told you it's not ready just yet.
Yeah, I know. I've heard that before.
Have you? Yeah. I'm hesitant to ask where.